But yeah, hi, hi everybody. I'm
Hello.
Avaer, also known as Adrian. I created the Exokit project, or should I say, Exokit projects. All of the stuff that you see here. Long history. I've been doing this stuff for many years. Just Exokit itself started like 2 or 3 years ago, but I've been doing VR for a long time before that. Basically, Exokit started at a time when Chrome was really unstable in its WebVR implementation, and pretty much things were breaking daily. And I thought, well, WebVR is such an awesome technology, and the web is probably the best way to build a sort of metaverse. But Google wasn't taking it seriously back at the time. There was like one person on it, and still to this day, there aren't really many people working on it. So I figured, why don't I just re-implement the whole WebVR stack myself? And that's what I did with Exokit Native. It's not really related to the screenshot, but Exokit Native was just a node-based binding of all of the WebVR APIs to native code, native OpenGL. So basically, it would let you open up any WebXR/WebVR, back at the time it was called, site, as a native OpenGL app. And one of the things that allowed us to do is, for example, be the first to ship WebXR on the Magic Leap. Yeah, that's a good screenshot. This was really early days. We first started with an OpenVR implementation, since that was pretty much the only sane open API at the time. But we quickly ported this stuff to the Magic Leap device within a few days of the SDK coming out. Before I even had a chance to try the Magic Leap, we had it working in their simulated environment. And so yeah, that's basically this video. It's some early stuff where we were running a WebXR app in AR, using Exokit technology, just doing the bindings that I did to OpenGL. And one of the main things that we learned from all of this is that basically WebXR is probably the best augmentation technology that we could possibly have for building the metaverse. Websites are these bite-sized, isolated, contained sandbox things that you can basically open in a spatial way. And this is where the notion of reality tabs kind of came from. It's the notion that you can open multiple pages at a time, just like you open multiple tabs at a time, except what if you could do that spatially? So what you see here in this video is actually pretty crazy. It's basically bridging the real world to the virtual world, where one of us, this is a multiplayer scenario, where one of us is in VR and I am here in AR painting, and we can kind of see each other. And I can even see my friend Nick. I could see him in my house. And he could see the meshing that I was doing in real time. And this is like another great example of why I think WebXR is such a good metaverse technology. It's because you can extend the APIs to do all these crazy things that, I mean, meshing is still feels like years away, but with Exokit native, we were able to basically add the API to a regular website, and that's all you're looking at. It's just a website that's calling meshing APIs that I invented. Yeah, and actually quite a few people, not me, made a whole bunch of money off of all of this technology, but it ended up just getting completely locked up. Because one of the main lessons that I learned from this whole ordeal is that open source is really good for people taking your code and monetizing it, but they really don't feel much of a need to bring any of that value back. So really what we got out of that is some people made a couple of $1 million, raised some money, and what we got out of that was one deeply buried reference to Exokit. So that was kind of a shame. But yeah, off the back of that, we also did some really cool stuff with PlayStation and Nintendo 64 emulation and kind of making that immersive. I kind of wanted to explore the idea of how can we augment Exokit browser dev team. There we go.
And this is Crash Bandicoot. Not PlayStation 4. And this is all
But yeah,
running
basically
in
what I did
JavaScript
here
assembly
was
and
I took the whole
WebXR.
concept of augmented
So I
reality
just
and I
wanted to
tried
walk
to
you guys
transplant
through
it more into a VR scenario. where can we take a 2D game that's been rendered with basically OpenGL. This is actually WebXR here, but it was using the WebGL to OpenGL bindings. So basically, I took that concept and I thought, hey, maybe we can put ourselves in between the GL stacks and run PlayStation or Nintendo 64 games in VR. Turns out that that did work. And we were able to basically put an immersive PlayStation game into a VR world.
Things like the Super Nintendo.
The main thing that we learned here is that it's totally possible to use the power of the APIs, the graphics APIs that we're using, and kind of do some learning on them in order to basically extrude functionality out of the application that was never intended by the developer. In this case, basically the PlayStation and Nintendo 64 were, of course, built at a time when VR was like not even on anybody's radar, but because it's using just standard GL technologies, we were able to basically rewrite things in real time in order to draw things into the headset. That will actually show up a bit later in the presentation as well. It turns out that people didn't actually really care so much about the technology here, but they really did care about the things that it enables. And one of the things is, yeah, you can finally be inside of your video games. You can be inside of Ocarina of Time or whatever. And in the browser, no less, because this is all just basically running WebXR with RetroArch. So a bit later, we also experimented with, so how can we do this kind of stuff in multiplayer? One of the most natural things that you'd want to do when you're playing a game is, hey, I want to play with a friend, right? So you can obviously run one of these things in multiplayer, but we also need an avatar stack, and we need some sort of social presence happening there. At the time, this was pretty much before even hubs was a real thing. I started experimenting with avatars, but eventually we kind of decided we wanted something more high fidelity than even what hubs was doing. And that's when we kind of came up with the whole idea of Exokit avatars, where I basically ported an existing implementation that was based on Unity. Is this a video? Yes, it is. We ported an existing implementation of avatars that was based on Unity, except I wrote it in WebXR, and I did all the bindings. That's me in the mirror. And completely web-based again. I wrote the inverse kinematics. I pretty much just spent a month debugging all of this stuff. And this is just a regular VRChat avatar that you drop into the web page. And yeah, there you go. So we ended up getting an avatar system for all of this, including something with legs. And another thing that we experimented with is, okay, so we have all this native stuff, but wouldn't it be really nice to be able to blend something like one of these WebXR implementations of the immersive PlayStation emulator and maybe put it into another world, maybe put it into Cryptovoxels or something else, or maybe put it into hubs. So I kind of took another look back at Chromium at this point, and I wanted to see, can we actually do all of the Exokit native type stuff, augmenting reality, inside of a regular browser? Has Chrome advanced enough? Turns out that the answer was yes. I took all of the learnings from the native days, and I managed to basically create a layer inside of iframes that allow you to blend worlds. And this is what you're looking at here. This is just basically regular Cryptovoxels with a poly model with my own UI. And the UI, we called it Exokit browser. So yeah, at this point, and by the way, this was all running in all headsets, all browsers, including Oculus Quest. Because yeah, it's just using basically regular GL technology and regular JavaScript and regular iframes, and just a really clever way of basically transplanting messages between the iframes so that none of the sites needed to be edited. And you can just basically augment any world on the web. Took a brief detour as to how we could do this maybe on a phone. Basically, the main thing that I wanted to do is take one of these worlds and put them on my iPhone, because I only have an iPhone, I don't have Android. So I experimented a bit with, can we take a SLAM engine and basically do simultaneous localization and mapping in order to localize from the video feed on an iPhone some coordinates. Turns out that yes, you can do that. I ported an existing excellent SLAM implementation called VSLAM to WebAssembly. It works. It's just way too slow on the iPhone browser because the video feeds that they do there are like 10 FPS, and then you add their slow WebAssembly on top of that, and it was just like completely unusable as an AR solution. So unfortunately, that didn't really go anywhere. But maybe one day. Another thing that we want to experiment with is, okay, so we're doing all this augmentation of virtual reality. Can we start to take some of these, for example, Magic Leap type features and put them into a VR world? One of the main features that I think is really dazzling and kind of like surprising when you first get it on Magic Leap is meshing. So I basically wrote a meshing engine which just uses marching cubes from the depth buffer of the application. This is just a regular web app as well. Basically, I'm taking the depth buffer and I'm using a meshing algorithm to extrude marching cubes meshes out of this. And what that allows you to do is, like, once you have the ability to mesh any arbitrary site or like any arbitrary world, this allows you to do even crazier things, such as, for example, cross-platform holoportation. If I am in, let's say, this hubs world, I can just look around. The meshing will happen from the depth buffer of the application, and then this can be sent over the network in order to basically give telepresence to other people and make my world a hologram in somebody else's world. Hey, Crypto. That's a bit more of a live video version of that. You can even do a voxel-based version of this meshing, where instead of doing a marching cubes implementation and just getting a triangle mesh out of it, you can get voxels out of it. And these voxels can even be colored because you can sample the color buffer of the world as well. So yeah, that's another technology. And once again, this is completely web-based. Another thing that we experimented with is how can we start to connect all of these things together and start to augment these worlds in a more structured way. That's kind of where we took a detour with Exokit Land, which is just basically taking the world, splitting it up into parcels, and creating an HTML sync engine that can sync these reality layers. So you don't actually see it over here, but what you can do is here, this is a persistent grid where you can basically place sites into the world that are persistent in a multiplayer setting, and it's completely live synced, very similar to how, for example, something like Cryptovoxels or Decentraland does it, but using all of this augmentation technology. Let's do the questions at the end. So yeah, and I experimented with a bunch of extra features here, like maybe what you want is not necessarily to be able to put in other sites into your world, but maybe what you want to do is you want to put in models into your world. Yeah, so there's another thing. And maybe this kind of crosses over into the realm of ownership of assets. Like maybe you want somebody to own a parcel. Maybe you want some item inside of the world to be owned by somebody. Maybe you want to grab the item. Maybe you want to put it in your pocket. You want to carry it over. Maybe you want to have some sort of persistence for your avatar. And then what do you do with avatars? Like, do people control their own avatars? How do you load them in? What are the limits? A lot of experimentation there as well. So this kind of leads us to a couple of weeks ago where I started experimenting with not only doing this in the web world, but also doing this in the native world. I think we kind of reached the limit of what was possible with connecting WebXR sites. I mean, we were managing to load pretty much everything and everything, but we have to realize that most of the world is still just using 100% native technologies. So as great as web is for augmenting virtual and augmented reality, most people still want to play their existing games. And VRChat is like the #1 platform out there that's doing really crazy things. So what I wanted to do is essentially, can we take all of this technology and start augmenting real native applications with it as well? So that's kind of where we got this result. It's basically just running WebXR. This is literally WebXR in Chromium, but also running on top of VRChat. And both of these things are essentially composited together with an implementation of OpenVR that I rewrote from scratch. Basically, I took the entire code base of SteamVR. I was heavily inspired, and I took a lot of code from another implementation that implemented OpenVR compatibility for Oculus, but I repurposed all of that in order to just completely have my own compositor where both Chrome, VRChat, or pretty much any app that runs on Steam right now in VR is compatible with a system like this, where you can just basically drop in any app into any app. So this is, just like one of those foundational pieces of technology I wanted to prove out. Is this possible? Turns out the answer is yes, it is. There's actually a few more videos of this one. There's VRChat here, then there's also like some other examples where I'm opening Google Blocks and, for example, watching a scene while also building a ladder out of the scene in Google Blocks. Or even playing Space Pirate Trainer. Another thing this allows you to do, which is surprisingly still pretty much impossible, is it allows you to put in 2D pages inside of any other VR app. Generally, the way that this works right now is every single engine implements its own 2D page loading system, but this kind of gives the control of all of that to the user. Here's Space Pirate Trainer, for example, and I have a UI there that is essentially just loading a 2D page, and the 2D page has a UI where you can click it to open additional apps and even close them. Once again, I pretty much implemented this just last night, but I kind of just wanted to show that it is actually possible, and we can start writing UIs and augmenting worlds in ways that we actually control, rather than essentially being dictated what we can do and what we can't do by the platform, or even being limited to single applications. Next steps for me are probably going to be to actually have a UI for being able to spawn these things. I'd like to take some inspiration from some of the stuff that we did with Exokit browser, where you basically can pull things out of the page, where you can place things into certain places. And basically just have the same technology that we have with Exokit Web and all of the native stuff with reality layers, except applying to all of OpenVR. In some ways similar to Cryptovoxels, but you can actually run Cryptovoxels inside of any of this technology, as well as open Cryptovoxels and then run other things inside of Cryptovoxels that Cryptovoxels wouldn't necessarily want there at this point. But the main question that I have from all of this is, okay, so now we basically have all of the foundational technologies for building. I feel like this is the ingredients that we need in order to build a metaverse. It's basically being able to plop anything, anywhere, and connect it together. But the open question for me is, how do you actually get people on board with all this? Will I sell land or parcels? Like, that's one of the ideas, right? Maybe that is the answer. I don't know. But like, one of the main hurdles that I found is that, one, authors don't really conform to specifications too tightly. Like, for example, today I just found out that Hubs does not actually support WebXR yet. It supports WebVR, but I wanted to do this demo inside of Chrome so that I could show you guys all of this working just in real time and kind of like make that a big reveal. But unfortunately, I can't because Hubs does not support WebXR yet. So like, that's kind of one hurdle that I feel like I've had to overcome with all of this. Another thing is that there's plenty of bugs in VR implementations, which authors aren't necessarily incentivized to solve. Like, for example, I would file bugs with like Cryptovoxels of like, hey, this isn't working, or like, we'd like to have auto entry on this page. And it just takes a while for authors to get around to that because everybody's busy. And this is really complicated technology. So I'm not actually sure how we can incentivize people to kind of start working together. Actually, that's not true. I do have some ideas, but that's kind of like the next thing that I wanted to go to a bit after. But for now, I think we could probably like take some Q&A before I jump into that, because it's like a whole new thing. So yeah, that's part one of the presentation. If people have questions, I can answer them. I missed all the questions, so if you could repeat them, that'd be good. Does anybody have any questions? Yes, that is actually my intent. Once I figure out the UI, I'm probably just going to dump it on Steam.
Sorry, what does that mean? Like you'd start some kind of like meta layer from Steam itself? Like use the Steam launcher to open a meta layer, or how did you mean that?
The way that I'm kind of envisioning it is like, this is just an application. Imagine a replacement for Steam VR Home almost, where you basically launch this thing and then from there you can launch whatever.
Sure, yep.
It could actually, it could basically just be a replacement for Steam VR Home. I'm sure that there's like a config setting that you could use it as like, this is your replacement compositor. Sure. Yep. Tilt 5?
Tilt 5.
Tilt 5.
Like a hologram type thing? Yep. Another thing that I didn't mention, I think I didn't mention it yet, but you have full control over all of this compositing yourself. I mean, I haven't implemented any of this stuff, but you can totally, for example, make one of the layers more opaque. You can run extra shaders on top of this. Actually, inside the Discord, I posted a bunch of like my experiments as I was developing this. Just a whole bunch of weird glitches kind of happened, but they ended up looking really cool. So I don't know, I might keep some of those in, maybe just have some sort of way to edit shaders and maybe even repurpose some things that people are doing with like reshade.
If no one implements this in the next, like, say, few months, will you do it?
I'm already doing it.
I mean, like, a full implementation of everything all at once.
Ends directly at your walls. I'm not sure what that really means. Like most applications today, this kind of goes down to the thing of getting other people on board with this idea. Right now, most applications do not have any awareness or even, like, they don't even really think about what it would mean to run multiple applications side by side. So for example, most authors don't design their rooms in a way that they have like specific bounds, or like everybody wants their own skybox, everybody wants their own like hands. So in some of these demos, what we've had like 8 hands, because every single app is just trying to pack in an avatar, pack in some sort of presence, pack in its own tools. So this kind of goes into like, how do we get these applications to maybe start declaring, to start talking to each other, to start cooperating more in building a metaverse, rather than everybody working with the model of, hey, there's an app store, my app was launched, and I'm the only thing that will ever run.
One approach is you find some kind of killer app, right? Some way that, like, I can clearly see how incredible this is, and how this is probably the most metaverse implementation of all metaverse things that is publicly available, right? But then if I'm like, when you say how to get people on board, do you mean the average VRChat user, for example? Do you mean WebXR developers, right? Like both of those people obviously could, you could try.
I mean that in, well, really 3 ways. You have the web crowd, which I think is a lot more receptive to kind of experimenting at this point. You also have the native app developers who are currently making money or like propping up their investments with whatever they're already shipping. Sure. And then you also have the actual users of all these apps. Right. And I think ultimately, I think the people who hold the cards are the native developers at this point,
That's
and the
true, but
platforms.
do you well, so would you petition to them to open up more facilities? Because, like, as in, how would you petition to them, right? One approach could be, if the users of, say, VRChat, if there were some killer augmented reality app that were just kind of traversing that network, and it would be, undeniable to the VRChat people, to the VRChat developers. Now, whether or not they would receive that, like, with welcoming arms, or try and find some way to shut you down, right? Like, or foreclose if you're encroaching on their turf.
That's exactly what I was thinking. Like, you're going to have to kind of drag people into this via the users.
Yep, that's very similar to my existing thinking. Jin, do you have? Maybe, depends on if Horizon wants to open themselves up. It's really unclear. It's really unclear what they're doing at this point, though. Jin, do you have the Jin? Do you have the business cards with VRChat? That'd be really cool.
Oh snap! That's great. So you need things in world that are like, what you like, as in you bring business cards around in VRChat.
No, it's a screenshot that somebody posted on Twitter or sorry, not a screenshot. It's just a photo of all the business cards, IRL business cards, that people are using to represent themselves in VRChat. So it's like a QR code on the business card, has their avatar. It says, "Oh, this is me in VRChat, and join me on this Discord or whatever."
One
yeah,
thing
this
you
is
could
it.
do is, it's sort of, I see. It's promo-ish. I see.
So I mean, on the one hand, sorry, go ahead.
Oh no, I was just gonna say, like at VCAT, people on the demo avatars, they attach QR codes, kind of like little promotional flyers or whatever, right? So you could imagine us, people who are interested in this and propagating it, like, wearing almost signs or calling it a business card. If on my hand I had a thing that, like, if I were in, say, VRChat, and I were in an augmented experience with someone else, and it were compelling, I could quickly distribute that to somebody else in VRChat by virtue of showing them, by way of showing them some in. But then the thing is, VRChat, unlike Hubs, in Hubs I could just drop a URL, but VRChat currently, to my knowledge, has no affordance for bringing even an image in real time, right? So then you could, right? So you could think of, like, people who are in your circle, almost like attaching to their avatars those kinds of affordances. I don't know.
Right.
Yeah.
Another, I think, force that we're fighting here is many platforms deliberately choose not to, for example, allow things like URLs, because they use the excuse that it's a security risk to, like, for example, run a browser or something, which isn't true, because, like, browsers are, like, the most secure things ever. Like, really, the security risk is it's the security of their business model. They want to control the flow of users in and out, and they want to make sure that, well, on the one hand, they do want to also protect their users. They want to, for example, make sure that there's no scammers, like, saying, "Hey, here's, like, my scam site," especially the crypto projects, right? Like, crypto security is still a big issue, so you don't want people going to this site, and, like, that site is designed to just kind of socially engineer the coins out of you. So on the one hand, like, we're also fighting the platform battle there. But I think, like, by the way, all this technology is, like, built without necessarily the consent or even the knowledge of the underlying applications, just because it works at the compositor level. So there's really no way that you can ban this, and I feel like this kind of system is the kind of thing that's going to exist anyway. It's kind of just like an operating system layer over the applications that you're running, and everybody kind of wants ultimately to have an operating system. The only reason that, like, this doesn't exist on the Quest really is because, like, the platforms basically don't want people doing this, and they want to control the users and what they're doing. I'm kind of trying to, like, break that up a little bit. Why couldn't Tiltbrush and VRChat sell it on its own? Sell
Sure,
what?
like a paint program in VRChat that you carry with you, right?
Or are you saying that, like, VRChat implementing this, or?
You just mean like A-frame, A-painter, like superimposed over VRChat. Is that what you mean?
Well, yes, we can do that.
Sure, yeah. Oh, I see. Literally Tiltbrush, native on native.
Yeah, yes, we can do that. In fact, like one of the demos here, I'm not sure if it's with VRChat. It's, I think, with just using WebXR, but yes, we can do that. So yeah, maybe like that would be the killer app. By the way, this is all just like super fresh. I just kind of wanted to get the demo out there, start the conversation, and I will probably just release this to testers like within a day or two. It really just needs some sort of launching UI so people can start testing. And then the end goal, at least in the near term, would be to get this up on Steam. I don't think that should be too much of a problem. It's just a regular Steam app, and there's really no crazy dependencies. It was actually super nice that OpenVR has the way that OpenVR works is you can set an environment variable to basically say this is my compositor. And all I really did to make any of this work was I said, I am the compositor. I am basically SteamVR. So the applications basically consider me the compositor. They're submitting their frames there. They're getting the poses from there. And then I am the app that submits to the real SteamVR. I'm just kind of in the middle. And it's all just working with regular DirectX and OpenGL stuff. There's really nothing too crazy there. One thing that I did have to do, though, is extract the depth buffers from some of these applications. Because most of them are not actually submitting depth, even though that is supported in the APIs. What I had to do is I had to look at, oh, this is a texture that's the size of the eye, but it's a depth texture, so I have to capture that at the right time. And it turns out that actually just works. And there's pretty much no overhead because I'm just using the textures directly and running it through a shader. Yeah, are there any more questions?
I was curious, what are your thoughts on next steps for this? Like, where do you see this going long term? I mean, obviously you want to get adoption from developers, but as we've all kind of agreed, you're going to have to drag developers in by building something that their users want so that they kind of have to join by force.
Yep. So that's probably a good segue into like some of these ideas that I had. I don't know, did that go somewhere? There was a thing here.
Oh yeah, there was one.
I moved it a little bit by mistake.
Like, it seems like you have all the puzzle pieces. How does that puzzle look?
I'm not sure I agree with this. Oh, good.
Go ahead.
Oh, I'm not sure. I'm just throwing an idea out. What if the framing or the approach were to never even really desire like permission or interop from the underlying, host? Like, let's say VRChat, right? Like, what if you were to design in such a way that you actually never even care if VRChat comes on board, that it really is sort of just like an augmented reality experience for people, and that it would propagate through that platform just by virtue of some value it creates, the word of mouth, kind of like you see other people doing something, they tell you to look cool in a Snapchat virality kind of sense, right? Like you could imagine on a longer play, maybe there is room for more interoperability, but it's almost like if you strategically address it with no concern for that, maybe, I'm not sure if I agree with it, but yeah. Just thinking.
I mean, that's kind of the approach that's being taken now. But I think more importantly than the platforms is the content creators.
Yes, of course, yes.
Because those platforms don't mean anything. I mean, when I say the users, I mean the consumers, but also the people who are creating content in VRChat. They're really the first audience that's going to matter.
Like the level designers? Or
yeah.
You mean, like, and
the level designers, the avatar creators.
Like, oh, so you design levels that think about structures that you could use, say, the SLAM. Like, do you know what I mean? Is that what you mean? Or like, how would the level designers factor in?
Level designers, developers, people who are basically capable of creating stuff that would utilize this, who have a good understanding of the platforms that they're using. So like, let's say somebody wanted to make something for VRChat. Like you said, make a level that's aware of and interops with this, or make content that's specifically designed for this, but fits into the culture, ethos, or bigger picture of VRChat.
Yeah, Jin had some interesting thoughts here, where basically this kind of works really well as holograms, where it's not necessarily these worlds trying to conflict with each other, but what you could do is just have a feature where you can basically pop up a hologram inside of VRChat, provided that people are actually kind of like buying into the compositor system in the first place. It's a nice segue into like some of the stuff that some of the ideas that I had around this. One thing that was mentioned in the Discord was QR codes. they're kind of like a universal interface. And if you just look at the IRL business cards, they're all just like packed with QR codes. I counted, I think, like 5 or 6 here at least. Everybody just kind of like representing themselves with my Discord address, my URL, or here's a QR code that you can scan. And the beauty of QR codes is they actually work perfectly inside of an augmented VR scenario. Basically, anybody can put a QR code on their shirt, anybody can put a QR code somewhere in the world, and that can translate to a URL, which, given the right compositor, it can just automatically detect that. And actually detecting QR codes is super fast. It's been working on like the crappiest like iPhone V1s since forever. You can do it basically at 90 FPS. So if you have a URL encoded in a QR code inside of a world, that can automatically be detected by the compositor. And even you could do some sort of object detection type thing on there, where it's like, oh, over here is this URL, and then there's like maybe some augmented UI where you can like kind of click to open it, and maybe that opens a web page, and then maybe you can explode out the web page into like some sort of WebXR scenario. So that's like one of the interop ideas that I had, where this requires absolutely no cooperation from anybody. It requires only just a buy-in to the idea of augmentation. And even better than all of that is, even if you're not buying into this whole idea of a metaverse, the URL and the QR code still works. Anybody can scan it. It's still a URL. And if you're not necessarily using the compositor, you can still find out what the thing was supposed to be, and then maybe find out, oh, like maybe there's this whole new world that I'm not seeing of augmenting this world. So like maybe I should give it a shot. So that was like one of the things. Another idea, this kind of, the prototype idea of this was, or maybe we can have like some pixels in the bottom of the screen, or we can like transfer data between apps, where you aren't necessarily even using any real API, but you're encoding data inside pixels, like at the bottom of the headset, where you could just kind of do messaging between applications. I thought that was also kind of interesting, like printer tracking almost, but in real time at 90 FPS with like a data transfer. If anybody,
like also closed captions work like that. They sort of put information in the overscan area.
Yep, that's kind of like one way of thinking about it. This kind of brings me back to the days when we had these prototype like Palm Pilots, and the way that you would sync them to your computer. I don't know if anybody remembers this, but the way you would sync them to your computer is you would put on your monitors some sort of image, and then you would point your palm at it, and then it would decode the images at like basically 90 FPS or like 60 hertz. And that's how like the data transfer was done. And you could also kind of like transfer data between applications that way. It's less compatible than QR codes because it would require people to actually have some sort of shader access through applications, so it's kind of less desirable.
Do audio? It could be like Square, right?
It could be audio, but then
it's well, yeah, I mean, it'd be wild. Anyway.
Like, I'm just imagining the modem sounds. Like bringing us back to the Stone Ages.
DSL.
Yeah. Another thing that like you could do is, just use something like WebSockets. Maybe just use network APIs. Most things at this point support WebSockets or HTTP even. If you just wanted to send requests, we could just say that, hey, if you just blast to this URL, which is just like something on localhost, then you can send messages between applications that way. Although I don't think that most applications with UGC would allow you to do that. Like I don't think even Udon with VRChat, it doesn't let you do I/O. So what it would let you do though is like if you had some sort of SDK, that could be one interface between these things where if you're like a native developer, you can just put in this SDK type thing. Could be for Unity, Unreal, or whatever, which is like what 90% of people are using anyway. So if you cover those two things, then maybe you can just get messaging out that way. And then once again, this kind of gracefully degrades regardless of like whether your app is supporting any of this or not. If it's supporting it, then yes, you can message, and yes, the apps like are aware, for example, other people's avatars. They're aware of like which hands you should have and things like that, and which avatar the user has selected. But another interesting thing here is the idea of like personal tokens and combining the idea of QR codes with tokens. So basically, I think one of the major things that's holding like a lot of this metaverse stuff back isn't even necessarily the technology, because I think like most of the technology is invented at this point. It's really just why would people have a reason to collaborate? And what you have happening inside VRChat is like really crazy. Right now, it's all kind of like off platform where people are throwing business cards at each other. Just basically black markets for creating avatars and things like that. But
Yep.
I don't think right now there's like any sort of interface within any of these worlds where you can do any of this stuff. Like you can basically go up to somebody in VRChat, they're like a designer or whatever, and you can say, "Oh, just meet me at this Discord." But like, what if you could just like meet somebody in VRChat and like hand them a dollar bill without like necessarily having to go through VRChat? Or maybe it's not even necessarily VRChat. Maybe it's like any one of these other apps that people are using. Like this is a robbery. Yeah, well, that's one way of looking at it. Obviously, you would want this kind of stuff to be secure. But I think MetaMask is like one of the really great ideas that's happened like in Web3. It's basically the notion that there is like a plugin and a relatively universal trusted interface for being able to request payments, scriptable payments, like through Ethereum and other stuff. And the user is like fully in control of that, and it's designed with like security in mind, where there is an interface where the site can request some sort of interaction, some sort of payment, and the user can say yes or no, while also seeing what is actually going to happen.
Have you
but if you
thought about? Oh, sorry. Yeah, MetaMask and this is that a conceivable marriage? It sounds possibly like a very dangerous, right? But like, could you wire up?
Yes,
MetaMask?
it is possible. So, for example, like we could have a QR code like right here, let's say, and that could be automatically detected, for example, by the compositor, and that URL can point to some sort of Ethereum address where you can say, "Oh, I really like this world. So I want to pay this person $1. So I'm gonna like take out $1 from my pocket and like put it onto the QR code in there."
I literally mean MetaMask. Could you just wire MetaMask up to your Chromium?
Of course. Actually, what I'm using in here, this is literally Chromium. Another thing, I don't know if I mentioned this, but the previous implementations of like Exokit native had absolutely like no 2D support. But this is running WebXR Chromium. So yes, you can just put regular MetaMask in there without any code changes.
That's kind of that could be a killer. That could be one demo that would blow some minds. I mean, for at the very least, right? Whether or not widespread adoption, who knows? But
I wish I had like another day so that I could.
Oh no! I mean, yeah.
But yeah, I agree.
I got a question when it comes to like the business perspective of this.
Sure.
Like of me wanting to use it, I'm new to VR somewhat. Like a couple weeks. Like I have, let's say I want to build a store. Can I do it in here and sell my products through here, like you're mentioning with the QR code? Maybe they can get linked up to my website.
The answer is a lot of people are already doing this, but the way that they're doing it is kind of like off platform. Like regardless of which platform you're using hubs like we are right now, or you're using VRChat. The way that it generally works is like you'll meet somebody, or like you'll see in the world there's like some sort of link, and then you'll go off platform to like some Discord or like to some other site where like maybe like some of the stuff is being sold. Kind of what I'm suggesting is like short-circuiting that, because if you could use just regular QR codes, then you wouldn't have to leave your headset even. You could know like this is the origin of this piece of content or whatever. Or maybe I just want to support like this cool person that made something awesome. Like maybe I really like that avatar and I want to throw some money at that person.
Or maybe because it's a product I'm signing, I'm thinking about tokenizing it. It's a stone book. It's meant for writing private keys, and it's made from stone. It uses stone paper, so it's something for the crypto space. And if I could sell it online, I mean, someone sends money to a QR code, and then they get a token back. And then what I do is I guess there'd be a way where they'd have information of their avatar, so I could send them the book. I know they have it because they have the token. I guess I could.
That's another thing that I hadn't even considered. Like
that's pretty cool, and that's where I think things are going where it's tokenized, that they have proof they purchased it, so their address will come up with their information, and I can just send the book, the product to them, whatever address they have there. It kind of like defeats the purpose of using, like let's say Shopify or just like middlemen. because it's direct and I know he purchased it. There's no one else that could take that token away from him. I mean, it's his wallet. He has a private key
Yep.
to it. So
Yeah, that's another thing that I hadn't really considered. Like, for example, if everybody even like had a QR code on their shirt, you could tell what are the things that somebody owns, or at least the things that
okay, yeah.
somebody chooses to express that they own. And the applications can be made aware of that. So, for example, you could have a barrier that doesn't open unless you have the appropriate QR code on your shirt.
Okay, that's true. Yeah. That, but that's like I'm thinking that could go down the line, like more down the road as you build this. You know, as you start taking off, getting more popular as it is, because I think this is really cool. I mean, especially implementing if you could, would you be able to own land here, NFTs like in Cryptovoxels, or is that something? This is more like a VRChat type of.
That's an open question.
Okay.
I've implemented several versions of that. Nothing that I'm perfectly happy with yet. But that is like
Okay.
one way that all this could go. Like maybe what you're literally owning is pieces of land.
Yeah, that's I don't know
But
how the
the-
way that works, but I mean, I'm pretty sure there's like a layer.
Layers.
I don't code. Yeah, I guess it would be mapped out, and we just own the token for that special parcel. I mean, that's the only thing. You don't have to run the whole thing on the blockchain, so kind of like how Cryptovoxels, it just runs on top, I guess.
The thing that I'm trying to kind of lean towards is being more of a piece of infrastructure than trying to invent like another application. Because I think like platforms like Cryptovoxels, platforms like VRChat, platforms like Hubs are doing an excellent job at like the niches that they're supposed to be working in. I don't want to reinvent anything. I don't want to reinvent like another Cryptovoxels, for example.
No, yeah,
Like if you want to own like Cryptovoxels parcels and you want to show them off, then the thing that I would like to enable is for like somebody to spawn in like a hologram of Cryptovoxels and be like, "Hey, I own that shit," whatever.
Yeah, that's true. I don't know if in the VRChat, like I could pull up like a browser, like you were saying earlier.
You can't.
I don't-
You can't do
can't?
that in like
Okay.
pretty much any of these platforms because they don't want you doing that.
Okay, so that's not cool. It's because they own the platform, so they control it.
Yep.
So here it's just like decentralized. I mean, people do what they want.
Yep. That's what I'm
That-
saying.
Oh, that's really cool. Okay.
And none of the platforms here are like even aware that I'm doing any of this. I didn't have to ask permission. Like I'm all about, I think that's written over here, but it's like
Even if
we
you took
build-
some of the code base, I mean, even it just doesn't matter, right? They still can't do anything about it, right?
they really can't do anything about it because it's working at the compositor level. It's basically the user is completely in control of that.
Are there
Oh,
any
okay.
That's-
checks? What I mean, so Quest seems like a no-go, but like, are there? I mean, unless I'm mistaken, or can you side quest all this? I mean, that seems like a.
Yeah, I have the quest. Is this possible? Or
On the web level, we've already done it. On the native
Yes,
level,
of course, yeah, sure. yeah.
I don't know, but there's a two-part answer to that. One is like
Uh-huh.
it might be possible technologically. I think the answer is yes. I could probably hack it if you gave me a month. But number two is like, is the quest powerful enough
Yeah, of
to
course
be
not,
able
sure,
to
yeah, right,
to be
sure.
able to like run all this
Right.
stuff? So my answer to that mainly would be
no?
if we're doing
Yeah,
that,
yeah,
you
sure.
probably just want to use Link or something.
Of course, yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yes, and to tell the rendering costs of all the stuff you're compositing together running at the same time.
Exactly. It works. The amazing thing about this stuff, though, is like it kind of scales with however many cores and however many GPUs you add, because like all this can happen in parallel.
Get a Ryzen sponsorship.
Yeah, exactly. So I mean, this is like an actual good use for 128 cores and like 6 Titans.
6 Titans.
Wow.
Personal experience OS stuff first.
What's
Like
that
what?
mean? You haven't-
We were talking about having Noah made the point of like content creation should simply just be easy. And I know I've talked to you about this before in the context of Exokit Land, wanting to build an app that is basically just XR content creation tools that you can then use to drop in whatever you create as just another app. And so then we were talking about recreating Supercraft and A-Frame, or not A-Frame, A-Painter in that context. Like that's
Makes
the
sen-
direction I would like to see to go with this.
Makes sense.
Yeah, that's
Why not just use actual Supercraft, for
Yeah,
example?
right.
Yeah, But I mean, something in Supercraft that, as opposed to exporting to just Supercraft or just, I don't know what the Supercraft's export format is, make it so that it can export as its own self-contained app.
Hmm.
So that I create something in my Supercraft-like interface, and then that thing becomes its own self-contained thing that I can now drop in anywhere.
I see what you're saying. So like basically a meta engine. So basically you're like okay, forgive the analogy, but like let's say you're in Unity and you're creating a Unity app, which then like you can also load.
Yes.
Is that kind of what you're saying? Like it could be web-based. It could just be like a web site where you're making websites, which can then be like transplanted over here, stored somewhere.
The way I picture this in my mind is I want AnyLand's modeling and scripting tools, but in a way that I can then package my final result and just drop it anywhere else, like anything else in Exokit.
Makes sense. Hadn't really considered that, but
that's something I've been thinking about a lot. Is the first time I saw Exokit land, that was the first thing I thought of. Was like, this is what I'm building.
Makes sense. Yeah, that should be pretty doable. I guess like the real missing piece there is like that tool that does that kind of export.
Yeah. Which, I mean, the packaging for that shouldn't be that difficult. Just spit it all out to a JSON and then write a loader.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, at the end, if it's just a WebXR site or whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah, it could be one direction. I'm not sure if I'm like the right person to be making like end user applications like this though. Like I've been working on this alone for like so long, and like so many people have like come and gone that like I'm kind of like sick of just building applications on my own. So what I'd like to kind of set up more is an infrastructure for somebody else to be able to make these kinds of applications rather than me making everything and trying to build the metaverse.
Yes.
So like I don't know, another idea that we kind of briefly discussed is like maybe there could be like some sort of store involved, like an augmentation store. Where it's just like you're buying augmentations from authors who have made them. And then just like that application could be an augmentation which you can drop into like other worlds.
Oh, cool.
Well, and that's what I was saying to Noah, is there shouldn't be one definitive tool. There should be, you choose your app of choice. You want something like Supercraft that has that visual aesthetic and that particular set of tools made for that aesthetic, load that up. You want something Painter that's more freeform and has more of the wireframe style, load that up. And just like pick your tool of choice. You can use MS Paint or you can use Photoshop.
I agree. I kind of.
And they can each make something. They can each make something.
I kind of lean towards saying that like most of these tools already exist. Like they just haven't been massaged into the right form for like this kind of augmenting. Like for example, Google Blocks just runs fine. It's just you're gonna get like weirdness where Google Blocks wants to have its own skybox, for example, as opposed to the VRChat one, so it doesn't like look great. And just like little things like that.
Can you call like outside of a spherical volume in that case, like from like right?
Yes,
like
yes, I can.
Yeah, just with the depth buffer, right? Basically,
right. It's another feature that we could add, but at that point, like, it's still. I feel like it's still kind of like a losing battle because every single time one of these applications is going to change. Like maybe
I wouldn't. Yeah, of course, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So, like, in some sense, I would want to solve the problem of like, let's, like you said, start with the users. Have some sort of use case that is compelling enough that like these platforms aren't going to just completely not care if like things break and then I have to be the metaverse maker that fixes everything all the time and like isn't even being really paid to do it. Like I don't think that's sustainable. I think what we really need to do is like start somewhere where people are actually incentivized to start working together in all this stuff rather than one person.
So the idea is essentially you have a packaging format or a list of them for each tool can be made into.
Welcome to the future. No, I mean the main thing that I've learned, like working with like all this tech.
The most recent chat message.
Oh, I missed it. Did I miss it?
Yeah, but like the main thing that I learned is like how weirdly technology evolves. Like, I mean, we're right now in a world that's like running JavaScript, like a weekend language that was designed for like pop-up boxes, but now it's like running reality. So, I mean, there's crazier things have happened. Could be.
Yeah.
Well, the only thing there is you're like the people who are there currently aren't many of them already developers who might like just develop on the native platform. Like the crazy thing about VRChat is, I don't know, if you roll up to VRChat and you've got a friend group there and two of your friends are just like waving their hands around in the air and talking and can see something you can't, you're gonna like want to get in on that or something. I'm not sure.
It's going to be a similar problem to the eventual, because we all know it's inevitable, adoption of augmented reality. Like right now, we are wearing our VR headsets, and people think we look like jackasses. But eventually, there's going to come a point where people are going to see somebody with a VR headset and be like, "I want to be doing that." And the same thing's going to happen with augmented reality. There's going to come a point where you go from that person looks ridiculous to I'm missing out on something that that person has.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. You know, this is already an environment where people build in VR. Yeah. VRC.
I'm not sure if like that's a good thing though. Like it feels like there is a natural general separation between the people who want to be building and the people who want to be using. Like I think most people go to VRChat not to necessarily build, and then there are the people who want to just express themselves to those people that are just kind of like patronizing content.
Yes, there's some folks who just want to come and be Kermit the Frog and make a funny voice and make their friends laugh.
Well, there you go, right? Like if you even in recent VRChat wanderings, it seems like a lot of people think they're going to be the next what's the guy's name? I forget the who did the yeah, okay, fair, but the Kermit interviewer.
Oh, Sirmore.
Yeah, right. So I've seen kind of people carrying themselves as though this is going to be their ticket to like YouTube fame, right? Like they're going to be the next him or whatever. So if you were to say like latch on to some of that energy, like create something that lent itself to like good YouTube content, or I'm not sure how much of that is actually driving VRChat use. Yeah, it's one thought.
Twitch overlays are easy, and they're also probably good for PR. So I mean, you see something cool, you want to try it.
So if we make a website where we can like change any other website into whatever model or any kind of tool that can make it and do it again, that'd be so cool.
I'm not sure I understand the question.
What I thought we were doing was we were going to make a website where we can take another website and turn it into a tool that can change a website into do it again, meta again.
I think you might be referring to like Zetaphor's idea.
Yeah, I think
I am.
I was talking about
that
building.
was my take on his idea.
Okay, not necessarily a website for packaging other websites. More taking the tools that you see in something like Supercraft or the tools that you see in something like Apainter, and stripping them outside of the environment of Supercraft and the environment of Apainter, and making them just the tools in of themselves, with the sole purpose of being used in something like Exokit.
You already did that like years ago or whatever, right? Like that is Exokit, Magic Leap, Apainter, yeah?
Yeah, I mean, effectively, yes, that.
Right. The thing is, like, I could make all these apps myself, but they're never going to be as good as, like, somebody who isn't doing it as a side project. Because right now, I already basically have 10 jobs. I have, like, all these projects to manage. I have M3s to kind of put up. I can't also be building, like, all these applications and supporting them as well. And then people coming to me kind of expecting more free support.
That's something that I personally would like to do. I've just been kind of waiting for like the right point to jump in. Like, I mean, Exokit Land, like seeing that was kind of what sparked it all for me. Because I basically saw like the any land that I wanted, not the any land that I have.
Yep. My goal is to basically like connect all of this stuff together.
Right.
At this point. Does your backend almost have
Sure.
the ability to take 3D screenshots? Yeah, you're probably just referring to like Spatial Engine. Yes, all I really want to do is take this code for like the meshing, for the voxelization, and yeah, basically be able to go into a world, kind of do your scanning thing, and then hit a button somewhere, and then you can export that as a model. Because really what you have at that point is a triangle mesh that's textured. I'm not sure if it's actually here. Tango, yeah, basically Tango for VR.
What
But
about
that's another? That's
what
another
Jin
use case.
just said? Tango for VR, but real time projected to a browser, so I could be in VRChat
Yep.
and project
Totally possible.
3D. Huh.
You should actually try Spatial Engine. I have a primitive version of this up there. It's, I think, spatial-engine.exokit.org. But there's a mode where like it basically maps textures on there. It's very early stages of that, but yeah, we could totally do that and just blast it over the network. But also do it for pretty much any OpenVR app, not only WebXR.
Right.
And yeah, then basically you could have co-presence. Let's say you have one person in either a Magic Leap or a person inside of OpenVR or like some sort of Steam VR game. They could have basically a link from that will open a browser window on somebody else's computer, and they could join in kind of like in the world and like blend the two together. That's another experiment that we could run. It worked really well for Magic Leap.
The kind of silly idea I had just thinking all that spatial engine stuff is, could you make it so you could have a sort of basically augmented reality pet you bring onto there, and they would sort of use the spatial engine thing so they don't bump into walls, because they'd have some idea of what the walls are in your VRChat home from the spatial.
Yep. So this kind of plays into the idea of like applications communicating with each other. What you could do is you could do this kind of meshing AR and VR type thing, extrude a mesh out of that, and then you can basically get physics, interworld physics. So I could be in like a VRChat world, and I could have a ball app, and I can throw the ball, and it would know like where the bounds of like the VRChat world are, just because it's been meshed.
Now,
and once again, like, go ahead.
It just gave me a silly idea with that pet idea. But what if you used to get an object with a QR code in VRChat to say, okay, when the pet gets like this close to the QR code object, is like try to eat it, or just something where you could basically like toys in the VRChat world for the AR pet, and figure out some ways for them to talk.
So yeah, I didn't really have anything else.
Oh, you mean only this?
only these 20 things.
It's just the fundamentals for a metaverse.
Yeah.
Just everything.
How far off do you think you would be from having loadable web UI in the OpenXR or the OpenVR mix?
By web UI, what are we talking about? Are we talking about just like literally web page?
So I could be in Space Pirate Trainer, and how are you doing keyboard navigation on that browser? Are you hard coding all of this?
I'm not right now, but literally what this is, you don't really see my desktop view, but I'm literally just opening Chrome. Chrome is connecting to my compositor, and then this is just literally Chrome. So what I could do is I could hook up VR controls. I could hook up even the native keyboards that, for example, OpenVR gives you. I could just hook into one of those APIs and put in like keyboard entry, just completely native to one of these browser windows. Of course, you can have as many of these browser windows as you want, and like any one of them can open like a WebXR page. So that's actually how I opened all these things.
I personally think VR controls and keyboard would be a good MVP, because then at that point you can start dropping in stuff, building interfaces.
Yep. Another kind of thing, I'm not sure if I mentioned this. This would be a shameless idea stolen from Janice, but like you could totally have websites where you're dragging like things out of the website into like your AR world.
Beautiful.
I wouldn't be the first person to do that, but like maybe even the websites could have QR codes. So once again, like how do you get people working on like APIs together? You could have a QR code in the website, and that could also be detected, which would allow you to, for example, take the DOM element with the QR code attached and like kind of drag it out. Maybe that represents, I don't know, some coins. Maybe that represents another site. Maybe that represents, I don't know, a location somewhere in VRChat, and you want to go there. So
Looks like I've got my work cut out for me.
I mean, this is all possible. Just like the question is like, how do we get people on board doing it so it's not like necessarily one person delivering everybody else a metaverse? As much as I enjoy doing it, I don't think I can build the metaverse myself.
To start toying with this new Steam VR or OpenVR, Steam VR stuff, what so that's not up on our repo yet, but it will be soon. What
There is a repo, but it's
okay.
There is a repo, but it's a disaster right now. I'll probably set up some GitHub actions to do the build.
Okay.
And then start dropping that within a couple of days for like some very early testing.
Okay.
Of the
And
compositing.
so the installation process is download this. Or you're thinking of trying to get it in Steam eventually, like the Steam.
That is the goal, but like for now, just for
now,
testing, it's basically a zip file.
Okay,
like this is just using portable Chromium essentially.
Okay. Okay. Sure. Cool.
And as long as you have Steam VR, it should work. Works on Quest 2. I just found out the other day, though, I'd been using Quest Link for like a month. But I just found out how slow it is compared to like the native. Right now, I'm on the Rift.
Wait, you said this works on Quest? How is...
It does work on Quest using Link, because that basically turns your Quest into a Rift.
Okay.
Oh.
A lot of the other stuff does work on Quest native, like all the Exokit web stuff just works in the Oculus browser. But this stuff that we're talking about with the native, yeah, it works on Link, but you do have to go through Steam at least.
Right.
As far as headset support, it's pretty much everything, though. Eventually, you won't need the native, though. I hope that we move to a world where like everything is packaged in some universal format and we can kind of do away with it. But the realistic, like, midterm solution is, I think, everybody is on these native platforms and you just have to play ball with it. It's kind of like the conclusion that I arrived at.
I wonder what that format will be.
WebAssembly.
Probably, yeah.
Hopefully WebAssembly, or like some sort of, I don't know, universal runtime type thing.
That's WebAssembly.
But yeah.
Anyone know offhand what percentage of people these days are doing VRChat from an HMD, and actually maybe even from a desktop computer HMD? Like, what's the breakdown vaguely? Does anyone know? 30% HMD. Okay. And
by doing, you mean like accessing it, or
like when they use users of VRChat? You're saying it's at 30% HMD, and that includes Quest. So like,
yes.
Here's another interesting thing that I kind of didn't mention that plays into that. Using this technology, this basically allows you to take any existing VR app, not only like WebVR, but native VR as well, and add keyboard and mouse controls to it, even if it didn't support it in the first place. You could just basically hook it up. Because I control like all of the matrices at that point. I'm not sure if there's any videos of it here, but yeah, it's totally doable. Oh, and I also ran, I wish I should have taken a video of this, but I also have Minecraft running. All this stuff. So if you wanted to like open a Minecraft world, you theoretically could. Another kind of thing is like, I think everybody wants, you could, use screen sharing. I think everybody also kind of wants like deep links for all this stuff because it's really inconvenient to like go into VRChat.
Of course.
And then try to navigate to every single thing, which is why they make you install that plugin for the browser. But it'd be really nice if like there was a more universal format for being able to specify a coordinate or like location inside one of these worlds, so that when you either spawn something in or like maybe it's a portal type interface, you're actually going directly to the place where somebody can just like link you a URL.
I mean, strategically, that could be one. If you super serve some community of people, like let's say it's Minecraft users, right? Like maybe finding someone in that community who could be a kind of like project caretaker in injecting those kinds of deep links, assuming they don't exist, right? Because you don't want to be this person managing the, the grid of adding, for every app, add these, these deep links or whatever. These kinds of draft downs.
I wouldn't mind being that person. I just realized that I can't do everything alone.
Yeah, of course, sure. Yeah, I mean,
Is
but
the multiplayer? Sorry, go ahead.
Oh no, but that might be one vector of sort of like, like having evangelists like who exist in other vibrant communities where, like if somebody else is a diehard Minecraft person and would then want to see this functionality, getting, Jin is basically like, Cryptovoxels, kind of like a, a person of this caliber in those fields. So finding other people who can, serve specific communities or sites. Sorry, you were going to say.
Yeah, so I was curious. The multiplayer syncing on this. This is all direct peer-to-peer RTC.
If you're referring to, for example, like land or like multiplayer, all that stuff, it is just using RTC. But I mean, architecturally, this doesn't require any particular kind of architecture. Like you can plug in whatever. I just ended up using RTC. Maybe that is the right path. Maybe it isn't. Maybe you want like more of a star topology somewhere.
I mean,
but then there's also like,
how does that scale?
RTC poorly, but if you're using like a star, like just using the RTC technology without necessarily using peer-to-peer, which is how, for example, Discord does it. What they do is they just have like a star server like right in the middle where everybody's sending in, and everybody's getting stuff out, and there's like maybe some muxing or like some mixing that happens in there as well.
Yeah, Hubs is doing the same thing.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, you could use that kind of architecture, but then there's an even bigger question here is like, do I want to be the person that like runs multiplayer for the metaverse? I don't know if the answer is yes for that, especially when we have like every single application from Hubs to Minecraft to VRChat to like literally everything has its own multiplayer implementation. So like, do we even need multiplayer?
I mean, you could do something kind of things like, I mean, how stun and turn servers currently work come to mind, or even something like how like Mastodon with their federated servers come to mind. Like, as long as you're on the same federation domain, then you're effectively synced. And so you could either host your own or you could join one of these other big ones.
Yeah.
But how would that play into something like VRChat having its own networking implementation? Like, it would be a pretty tough sell to say, VRChat, please re-implement your network stack to be compatible with something different. Like,
long-term platform integration, that's a bigger question. I'm thinking more short-term.
In the short term, I would probably just experiment with RTC. I think that's good enough.
Yeah.
I mean, especially if you shard it or like do a party-based system, kind of like Hubs.
I mean, long-term platform integration, you'd probably have to start looking at a protocol.
Yeah, that's kind of like my hope with all of this is kind of paving the way for like once people realize the value of actually connecting a metaverse type thing together. At that point, standards become more important. And you actually do want to have the platforms basically declaring what the network stack is, maybe like agreeing that we're going to be doing this kind of RTC with like these things supported, like kind of basically the way that browsers evolved. Eventually you just arrive at a thing that you can rely on.
I want to hear more about the ideas Zeta4 and I went on about.
Sorry, what?
I want to hear more about the ideas Zeta4 and I went on about earlier on.
Oh yeah, I've been thinking about that a lot.
Yeah.
Honestly, like Adrian, once you get to a point where you've got that OVR binary to a point where I can run it, I think now is as good a time as any to start sitting down and writing some code. I mean, I've already built a version of what I just described with the project I told you about previously. I mean, I've already done instance buffering and the whole 9 yards, so I just need to sit down and do it again.
Sweet.
I also thought of another thing, like once we strip out the tools, it should maybe build that application into a version of itself that has not only the tools stripped out, but it should build a version of that application so that you can strip them out again, and the tool. I'm trying to describe it, but I don't know if I can. I'll try to write it down.
Kind of like how with
Like you-
glitch, how you can publish an app and then anybody can remix that app,
Yeah.
and then
It
anybody
should be,
can
it should
remix
be
your remix.
republishable. It should be republishable immediately after you make it, so that you can make it again and again and again and again,
Yeah.
and redistribute it over and over again, so that you can keep doing it. Is what I'm saying.
Yeah, my initial thought was that like you would publish it,
And not only that,
via
but the
an
tools,
API
what
to,
the
like,
tools will be doing. You do with the tools too.
yeah. My thought was like packaging and publishing would be on something like, say, GitHub Gist.
Yeah.
So then you sign in with OAuth, and then you've got versioning, you've got forking, you've got sharing.
Sure. Why not? I just wonder what Adrian
Could it
thinks.
just be GitHub Gist?
Sure.
I mean, it could be. Yeah, it's just a gist, and it's just a URL, and then it's just an interpreter. Like, huh?
The main thing that like the main overarching philosophy that I have here is like the metaverse already exists, it's just not connected yet. So like we're basically talking about existing apps and like rewriting them. I would say like we don't really even need to rewrite anything, we just need to connect it. Like like you mentioned, we have Glitch, we have HackMD, we have GitHub, we have Gists, we have Git, we have all these applications, we have Supercraft, we have Tiltbrush, we have Medium, we have Google
Yeah.
Blocks.
Okay.
Do we need to rewrite any of these things at all?
No,
Or do we
connect
just
them
need to
better.
work to connect them better?
Yeah.
Open question.
You just kind of shifted my perspective into a parallel dimension.
It's true. It's true.
You're welcome.
Huh.
Thank you. Thank you.
That's kind of like where I was going with the whole QR code type thing. Like, there's all these existing platforms. Maybe if we can like figure out how they can just like be, the users can force the platform authors to allow things to talk to each other, then we don't have to rewrite anything ourselves. Or
I had
maintain
this
it.
idea about the QR codes like last week all the way, by the way, on Twitter.
Cool.
Sick.
Spawning an event with a QR code. Yeah. Yeah. Not exactly the same QR code idea, but still.
Yes.
What are you doing?
So, yeah.
Is that Chris Novello?
That was basically part 1 and part 2. I kind of like went into part 2 there. Part 2 was essentially just which one of these ideas like do we want to experiment with next, and like is there anybody that kind of like wants to test the waters with it? Like Noah mentioned like excited about the QR code idea. So
Let me
before I
test the
mentioned
waters with spawning links with an NVR interface. When you get me a version of this, I can run.
Spawning links meaning
Like launching pages or URL-based media,
right.
with a tangible user interface inside of VR.
Right, exactly. That's
Right,
pretty
so
much what I was
so-
just working on today. Like
Okay.
the launcher where it's just basically a page. I don't know if like it's even clear from some of the media, but basically the launcher is a page that lists the current Steam VR apps, and it also like lets you basically click for the WebXR samples or whatever and
I see.
enter VR. So I'm kind of thinking like it's just going to be a web page at this point, but with like proper keyboard controls, maybe prettied up where like it's not just like some A tags, but like maybe some actual icons for the Steam games that you have. So it doesn't necessarily feel like a web app, but like an actual launcher. And you can like click things, enter URLs, enter other paths, and yeah, spawn stuff. And hopefully like drag these windows around so they're not constantly getting in the way. Just when making these videos,
Yeah.
I had to hard code like what the actual location was because I kept bumping into things all over the place.
How it works in Magic Leap.
But yeah, I'll try to get that to you guys. I think that's
Sweet.
really close.
Awesome. Oh my god.
And yeah, really part 2 was Tiltbrush and VRChat. Yeah. Do you mean specifically Tiltbrush? Oh, I should try Tiltbrush. Tiltbrush or Google Blocks? I was running Google Blocks in one of these demos.
Wait, so when you say Tiltbrush, you mean an OpenVR binary running in parallel with an OpenVR binary and intermeshing them?
Absolutely, yep.
Is this still part of
Wait,
Reality
that's
Talks?
a thing? I only remember you talking about as far as going with web and OpenVR binaries.
No. This is completely general.
What?
No, this is completely general. It's a full OpenVR compositor, so it can run whatever with whatever.
Oh shit.
Maybe, yeah, sorry about that. Maybe that wasn't clear. Like, for example, I was running Space Pirate Trainer there, but it could just as well have been Space Pirate Trainer with Google Blocks and Tilt Brush in it as well. Has nothing to do with necessarily OpenVR.
So
Or,
it being
sorry,
Chrome was just you chose Chrome, not that it was specifically made for Chrome.
Yes.
Oh hell.
Oh.
I think my brain just like folded in on itself.
Yeah, I was hoping that I could get like actual tilt brush inside of VRChat, but yeah, that's.
So, okay, a silly idea that just came to mind. If I could smush any Doom CVR games, there's like the VR emulator for Dolphins, so I could cram like Nintendo games and VRChat on top of each other.
Dude, wait a minute.
Yes, Dolphin reality.
The computer will explode Jins right though.
So,
I mean, yes, but if you could have your friends in VRChat
yeah, 100%.
inside of your like, what is it, the Emu VR room?
Wind Waker.
Yep, you can see each other playing like.
But then, how does the video sync work there?
That's a good question.
That is an open question. Like, as long as the application is like frame perfect and like you do like some sort of input mapping, like theoretically it's possible to get it like 100% synced, even though it's all a local render. Yeah, but there's a lot of like crazy techniques that gets into. I think like a first step would just be to start getting people running like these apps.
Yeah.
In like the same world, in the first place.
I wonder why Chris is making all those.
So there's an application, I can't remember the name of it, but you can
Blog post
basically.
is a good idea. Go ahead.
There's an app on Steam VR where you can take recordings of. There's only a handful of games that they support, and I know like Superhot is one of them. So you basically play Superhot while you're running this, and it records your gameplay with full spatial mapping, and it records you. And then you can go back with your friends and like replay that in full 3D VR, and like you guys can walk around your previous self playing in the world.
Oh, that's so cool.
Isn't that the thing?
Pretty much anything that has perfect synchronization between the frames would support like this kind of thing. But I think like right now, most people, the way that they develop their applications is like it's not frame perfect.
Right. I'm curious how they accomplish that though.
Is that Pluto or is that something different? Do you know Pluto?
I don't remember what it's called.
No,
I'd have to look it up again.
Pluto
it's
doesn't
not
allow that?
Pluto.
Okay.
Pluto's a different thing. That's the overlaying hubs
So it's
avatars pretty much onto Steam VR game the boot.
Hop out of here and see if I can find that again.
Yes, and I like
It'd be
that
interesting to
power
see
of
it,
but
but I understand what you're saying. Pretty much anything should be able to support that as long as like there's some sort of frame perfect nature to the application. You can technically rip game geometry. It's a bit harder of a problem though.
And also, you have to worry about the lawyers.
Lawyers.
Yes, you're sort of distributing copyrighted content.
Oh, that's.
Oh, I think I found it.
This is a lawyer.
Oh, that's a very loud, incorrect video.
That's okay. If you find it, just post it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that's gonna bug me. I need to find that now.
URL links to URL links to URL. I like that one.
Okay. What do I have to do? I have to get one of these applications out, building
Exokit is
into a
the
zip
best,
file.
for sure.
Right now, like a lot of the paths are hard coded. Yeah. I think it's about time to wrap it up anyway. But I think the next steps for me are just like to get that out to testers. That shouldn't be too difficult. Just like everybody should keep in mind that it's very alpha software at this point. And a lot of this stuff I think does deserve a blog post. I haven't written about any of this stuff like in ages. Blog post and a couple of videos to go along with it.
Yeah, for some reason now I'm thinking with that dolphin sketch and imagining Wind Waker running on your table on VRChat if you like took out the sky.
Absolutely.
Nice.
Yep.
Awesome. Until 5.
I mean, I think I even mentioned it in one of the videos for like EmuKit.
Sure. But like,
That like this is literally what I wanted to accomplish, and yeah, sorry for not making that more clear, but it is a general compositor. It runs every single OpenVR thing.
Nice.
Yeah, I agree. It's an excellent strategy until it falls apart. I mean,
Yeah.
they're kicking a lot of ass of headsets that like had a lot more bombast to them, just by focusing on a real use case.
Yes. Since the tabletop
Tables
crowd are
everywhere.
definitely folks who would have use for that, since you could do a lot more cool things with your board game design if you can, do some augmented reality stuff. Like there are some board games that pretty much you require a phone app to go with it to automate a lot of the sort of rules keeping aspects of it.
I'm
yeah,
all
you
about
could-
like I'm all about like building the metaverse, but like I think at this point it's like how do you convince people to build the metaverse more than like how do you build the metaverse? And I think like you really just have to lean into what people are already doing, and one of those things is just running a lot of native games on OpenVR. The thing that I would like to see is if every one of these things eventually just makes its way onto some universal thing like WebAssembly or whatever. But that's just not the world that we're living in yet.
yes.
So the thing is like, yeah, how do you trick people? Maybe OpenXR is like the right path. Right now, I just implemented all of this in OpenVR, but it might as well have been OpenXR. It's just that's not as widely supported
Oh
yet.
man! So I found it, and I go to their website, and we're incredibly proud of the work we've done. Unfortunately, the VR market never developed as quickly as we had hoped.
Our incredible journey.
Yep.
What was the name
In
of
fact,
that
yes,
song?
it's been an incredible journey.
Did they actually say that?
It's been an incredible journey, and we want to thank our
God.
community.
Like that's the meme that you hear in like startup circles. Like it's the incredible journey post.
Jeez, what was the name of
Proper
this?
help.
I will post. It's called VReal.
Oh yeah, I heard of that.
Okay.
I see what you're saying. Yeah, I remember them shutting down as
Okay.
well. I think the way that they implemented it, I did a bit of research on them. I think the way that they implemented it is like, it's very similar to kind of what I'm doing, where like they're looking at what the API calls are, but they did it like much. They had like a much rougher time than I do because all I really needed was the depth buffers, the textures. But what they actually did is like I think they deeply hooked in and like captured all the input and like timed all the frames. And they had to do it for every single and they had to do it for like every single application, so it was like completely not scalable at all.
Because I remember they only supported like 1 or 2 games.
Yeah, I think it was a manual implementation for every single thing, and of course, every single time like one of the engines would update or like one of these applications just publishes a new version, it would stop working. Right? Did they partner with them?
Who did?
Yeah.
I missed that part.
Yeah, I think so. Since I remember hearing something about like the downloads are kind of big because they basically had to re-implement all the games like art assets into the thing to stream it.
Oh god.
Don't want to be doing that. Like, I mean, a lot of this stuff is like technologically possible, but I don't think that's a sensible way of like going.
I know. I just.
And if your game is non-deterministic, so basically not super hot.
I mean, Super Hot is like the perfect example of like a deterministic game, right? Because like it's all about time and like perfect syncing to the headset.
Yeah.